The snow fell softly outside the grand windows of Wintercrest Resort's main lodge as I watched my family arrive for our annual Christmas gathering. My father's Mercedes pulled up first, followed by my sister Kate's Range Rover and Uncle Peter's luxury SUV. From my hidden spot in the manager's office, I could see them all clearly while remaining unseen. "Everything's prepared, Mr. Alexander." Thomas, the lodge manager who'd helped me execute my plan, stood nearby. "Perfect, Thomas. And remember, to them, I'm just arriving tonight. As far as they know, I'm still the family's underachieving son who works in real estate development in Seattle." If they only knew that underachieving had translated to building a billion-dollar property empire over the past decade, all while they thought I was barely making ends meet. My phone buzzed, the final confirmation from my lawyers. The last paperwork had been filed. Wintercrest Resort was officially mine, purchased through a maze of shell companies for $50 million. Not bad for a property my father had called worthless last summer. I watched as the family gathered in the lobby, their usual dynamics on display. Dad, still commanding attention at 65, discussing business with Uncle Peter. My sister Kate, 35, checking her phone while her husband Mark herded their two children. And my younger brother David, 28, already heading for the bar. "Mr. Alexander," Thomas's voice was low, "the records you requested are in your suite." I nodded. Those records had been the key to everything: guest logs, maintenance reports, and financial statements going back 30 years. They told a very different story than the one my family had been selling. "The Wintercrest Ski Resort is worthless now," my father had announced at our family dinner last summer. "We're selling it to developers." I'd stayed quiet then, but I'd known something was wrong. This resort had been our family's Christmas tradition for 3 generations. My grandfather had built it from nothing, turning a simple ski lodge into one of Colorado's premier winter destinations. The idea that it was suddenly worthless made no sense. So I'd started digging. What I found had made my blood run cold. But now wasn't the time to reveal that. First, I needed to play my role. I grabbed my bags from the office and made my way to the front entrance, then walked in as if I'd just arrived. "Jack," Kate spotted me first. "We thought you'd missed your flight." "Traffic from Denver," I lied smoothly, accepting her hug, "but I wouldn't miss our last Christmas at Wintercrest." Dad barely looked up from his conversation. "Son, glad you could make it. Wouldn't want to break tradition," I said, watching his face carefully. "Though I heard this might be our final year here." Unfortunately, Uncle Peter jumped in. "The resort's not profitable anymore. Best to sell while we can still get something for it." I noticed he didn't mention who we were, since technically the resort had belonged solely to my grandfather's trust, not the family directly. But then, creative interpretation of ownership had always been a family trait. Speaking of which, Dad finally turned his full attention to me. "Have you heard anything from your development contacts about the property?" "A few interested parties," I said vaguely. Mountain real estate is always attractive. If he only knew that every interested buyer had mysteriously withdrawn over the past 6 months, scared off by subtle hints about environmental issues and permit problems. Amazing what you can accomplish with the right connections. "Well, we're just glad you're here," Kate said, ever the peacemaker. "The kids were asking about Uncle Jack's famous Christmas cookies." I smiled, remembering how I'd started that tradition years ago. Back when I was still trying to find my place in the family, still believing I could earn their respect through small gestures. "First thing tomorrow," I promised her children, who beamed. At least their smiles were genuine. As everyone dispersed to their rooms, I caught Thomas's eye. He gave a slight nod. Everything was in place. In my suite, I found the records waiting. 30 years of history, telling the true story of Wintercrest. My grandfather's vision, his careful building of not just a resort but a community. The staff he treated like family, the guests who returned year after year. And then, after his death 10 years ago, the changes. Money disappearing from accounts. Maintenance budget cuts that went straight into private pockets. Staff benefits slashed while executive bonuses soared. But the real story was in the guest records. Specifically in what had happened to certain wealthy guests who'd stayed in Suite 401. My phone buzzed again, a message from Detective Sarah Martinez. "FBI team in position, just give the signal." I put the phone away and changed for dinner. The grand dining room was already filling up when I arrived. families gathered for their own Christmas traditions. Many had been coming here for decades, drawn by Wintercrest's reputation for old-world charm and impeccable service. Jack, David waved me over to the family table. Tell Dad about that development deal you're working on in Seattle. I sat down, noting how they'd arranged themselves. Dad at the head, Uncle Peter to his right, Kate and Mark next to them. Power dynamics never changed. Not much to tell. I shrugged. Just another office building. See? Dad turned to Uncle Peter. This is why I worried about Jack going into real estate. No ambition, no vision. I bit back a smile, thinking of the Forbes article sitting in my inbox, waiting to be published. The silent billionaire. How Jack Alexander built a real estate empire in secret. Speaking of vision, Uncle Peter leaned forward. We should discuss the resort's sale. The developers are eager to move forward. Which developers? I asked innocently. I'd love to know who's interested. They exchanged glances. It's confidential, Dad said firmly. Of course, I focused on my meal. Though I did hear interesting rumors about Suite 401. Uncle Peter's fork clattered against his plate. Dad's hand tightened on his wine glass. What rumors? Kate asked. Oh, just something about certain guests having unusual accidents after staying there. Quite a few over the years, actually. And always after they'd made large investments with our family's firm. The table went silent. Even David stopped drinking. That's ridiculous, Dad said, but his voice lacked conviction. Is it? I pulled out my phone, showing a news article from 5 years ago. Like Gregory Thompson, successful businessman, stayed in Suite 401, had a tragic skiing accident 2 days later. After investing $10 million with Harrison Investment Group. These things happen in skiing, Uncle Peter said quickly. Mountains are dangerous. True, but it's interesting how many of these accidents happened after the victims discovered discrepancies in their investment accounts, and how often those accounts were managed by certain members of our family. Dad stood up abruptly. Jack, a word in private, why not discuss it here? I looked around the table. Kate, did you ever wonder why Grandfather's Trust suddenly named Dad as sole executor, or why the resort's profits dropped so dramatically after his death? That's enough. Dad's voice carried across the dining room. My office now. I followed him to his private office. The same one where my grandfather had once worked, where he taught me about integrity and responsibility, while Dad and Uncle Peter mocked my interest in the resort's operations. What game are you playing? Dad demanded once the door closed. No game, just interesting timing, selling the resort right when the statute of limitations on financial fraud is about to expire. His face paled. You don't know what you're talking about. Actually, I do. I opened my briefcase, spreading out documents. Grandfather suspected what you and Uncle Peter were doing with client funds. He was gathering evidence. That's why you had to act. Act? His skiing accident wasn't an accident, was it? Just like all the others in Suite 401. The room with the perfect view of the advanced slopes. The room where you could verify your target's routes. These are dangerous accusations, he said quietly. They're not accusations. They're facts, backed up by 30 years of records, witness statements and financial transactions. Did you really think no one would notice? Notice what? He tried to sound confident, but I saw the fear in his eyes. How you and Uncle Peter used the resort to lure wealthy investors. How you manipulated their accounts, then arranged accidents when they started asking questions. How you killed your own father when he discovered the truth. He moved suddenly, reaching for his desk drawer, but I was faster. Looking for this, I held up his gun. Thomas removed it this morning, along with everything else you might find useful. Thomas? He works for me. No, Dad, the entire staff works for me. I bought Wintercrest 6 months ago, through shell companies. Every room is wired, every conversation recorded. And the FBI has been watching everything. As if on cue, sirens sounded outside. Through the window, we could see police cars arriving, their lights painting the snow red and blue. You can't prove anything, he whispered. Wrong again. I opened my laptop, showing him footage from Suite 401's hidden cameras. Years of conversations, plans, arrangements for accidents. Why? He sank into his chair. Why did you do this? Because grandfather believed in something more than money. He built this place for families, for memories, for joy. You turned it into a killing ground. The office door opened. Detective Martinez entered, followed by FBI agents. Richard Alexander. She held up her badge. You're under arrest for multiple counts of murder, fraud, and conspiracy. I watched as they led him away, past shocked guests and staff. Uncle Peter was already in custody in the lobby. Kate stood with her children, crying, while David looked like he might be sick. Jack, Kate's voice was small. Did you know, all this time? I suspected after grandfather died, but I needed proof, and I needed control of the resort to protect it. What happens now? I looked around at the Grand Lodge, at the families gathered for Christmas, at the snow falling softly outside. Now we rebuild, the right way, grandfather's way. I handed her a folder. The resort's profits have been going into a secret account for years, millions that should have gone to his trust. I've arranged for it to be distributed to the victims' families. And the resort stays in the family, the real family, those who remember what it was meant to be. That night, after the police had gone, and the guests had finally returned to their rooms, I stood in my grandfather's office. My office now. Photos on the wall showed happier times. Family Christmases, skiing lessons, summer barbecues. Mr. Alexander. Thomas appeared at the door. The press is asking for a statement. Tell them the truth. Wintercrest Resort remains committed to its traditions of family, community, and integrity. Under new management, we look forward to continuing my grandfather's legacy. As I looked out at the moonlit slopes, I thought of all the Christmases to come, the families who would make memories here, the traditions that would continue. The resort would survive this scandal, stronger and more honest than before. My phone buzzed. A message from Detective Martinez. Confession secured, both of them. It's over. Not over, I thought. Just beginning. The morning after the arrests, I sat in the resort's main office, my grandfather's old office, watching the snow fall outside, while headlines screamed across every news channel: Wintercrest Resort scandal. Rich family jailed for old murder plot. Billionaire son reveals family's secret Christmas miracle. One man saved the family. Name. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. Come in. Sarah Martinez, now lead FBI investigator on the case, entered with a thick folder. More victims' families have come forward. We've identified at least 12 more suspicious deaths connected to Suite 401. I rubbed my temples. 12 more. Your father's starting to talk, she added, taking a seat. Trying to cut a deal. He's willing to implicate your Uncle Peter in everything. Honor among thieves, I muttered. What about the financial records? We've traced over $100 million in stolen funds. Your father and uncle were clever, using the resort's legitimate business to mask their operation. Wealthy guests would invest through their firm, then have convenient accidents before they could discover their money was gone. The intercom buzzed. Mr. Alexander, your sister's here. Kate entered before I could respond, looking like she hadn't slept. The press is everywhere. They're calling us the Christmas Killer's family. I've arranged for private security, I assured her. Your children will be protected. Protected. She laughed bitterly. From what? The truth, that their grandfather and great-uncle are murderers, that our whole life was built on blood money. Not everything, I said quietly. Not grandfather's legacy, not what this place was meant to be. How long? She sank into a chair. How long have you known? I pulled out an old photo from my desk. Our last Christmas with grandfather. I started suspecting after his death. The timing was too convenient. He'd called me the week before, wanted to discuss something important about the resort's finances. And suddenly, a skiing accident. But why didn't you come to me? Would you have believed me? Back then, I was just the family disappointment, remember? The one who couldn't handle real business. Sarah cleared her throat. Miss Alexander, we'll need to interview you about any interactions with Suite 401 guests. I never knew, Kate whispered. I swear, Jack, I never knew what they were doing. I know. I squeezed her hand. That's why I made sure you and David were cleared before making the arrests. My phone buzzed. A message from Thomas. Emergency meeting requested. Staff needs direction. Excuse me. I stood. I need to address the employees. They're scared, confused. In the main ballroom, nearly 200 staff members had gathered. Faces I'd known since childhood. People who'd helped build Wintercrest's reputation for excellence. First, I began. Everyone keeps their jobs. The resort stays open. What my father and uncle did was not your fault. Relief swept through the room. Second, there will be changes. Good ones. Restored benefits, better wages. Profit sharing. My grandfather believed in taking care of his people. It's time we return to that. Margaret, our head housekeeper for 30 years, raised her hand. What about Suite 401? Being completely renovated. Its history ends now. Back in my office, I found David waiting. My younger brother looked lost, clutching a glass of bourbon, despite the early hour. Did you know, he asked, that Dad used my skiing lessons as cover? He'd take potential victims out, show them the family tradition, while plotting their deaths. David, all those Christmas mornings, all those family photos. Lies. Everything was lies. I took the glass from his shaking hand. Not everything. Not what we can build now. How are you so calm? Our father is a murderer. Because I've had years to process this. Years of gathering evidence. Building my own success in secret. Preparing for this moment. The real estate empire, he said slowly. That wasn't just luck, was it? Every property I bought. Every deal I made. It was all to gain the resources and connections I'd need. The underachieving son was building something bigger than they ever imagined. My phone buzzed again. The governor's office. They wanted to discuss the impact on local tourism. What happens now? David asked. Now, we restore Wintercrest to what it should be, a place for real families, real memories. Sarah returned with more files. We found something else. Documents about your mother's death. My hand froze over the desk. What about it? It wasn't an accident either. She discovered some of the financial discrepancies. Your father. Stop. I closed my eyes. Just add it to the charges. After they left, I stood at the window, watching families arrive for their Christmas vacations. Despite the scandal, despite the police tape around Suite 401, people still came. The magic of Wintercrest was stronger than its darkness. Thomas appeared with afternoon reports. Bookings are actually up, sir. People want to see the place that brought down the Christmas killers. Make sure they see more than that. I instructed, show them what my grandfather built, what we're preserving. That evening, I gathered Kate, David, and the senior staff in the grand dining room. Tomorrow the press will want statements. They'll want to know how we move forward. So let me be clear. Wintercrest Resort isn't just a business. It's a legacy of joy, a family of real traditions. What happened in Suite 401 ends now. We go back to my grandfather's vision. Kate wiped tears. He'd be proud, Jack, of what you did, of what you're doing. The silent son. David managed a small smile. The one they never saw coming. The one who remembered what matters. I corrected. Outside, snow continued falling, covering yesterday's police tracks with fresh powder. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, more revelations. But tonight, watching the Christmas lights twinkle across the resort, I felt my grandfather's presence. The empire of lies had fallen. The real legacy could begin. 1 week after the arrests, Christmas Eve arrived at Wintercrest Resort with fresh snow and renewed purpose. The media frenzy had begun to settle, replaced by a different kind of attention. People drawn to the story of redemption, of justice, served through patience and determination. I stood in the renovated suite, 401, now transformed into a memorial gallery. Photos of my grandfather lined the walls, along with the true history of Wintercrest. No more secrets, no more shadows. The victims' families are here, Kate said softly from the doorway. They want to see it. I nodded, straightening my tie. We'd invited them all. Every family who'd lost someone to my father and uncle's schemes, not for publicity, but for closure. The main lodge had been prepared for a special ceremony. As I descended the grand staircase, I saw them gathered, dozens of families, their faces a mix of grief and gratitude. Detective Martinez stood quietly in the background with her team, documenting everything for the final case files. "Welcome to Wintercrest," I began, my voice carrying across the hushed room. "For years this place held dark secrets. Today we acknowledge the truth, honor those we lost, and pledge a new beginning." One by one, family members stepped forward to share their stories. George Thompson's widow spoke of his love for skiing. The Chen family remembered their father's excitement about bringing his grandchildren here. Each tale added weight to the legacy we had to repair. "My grandfather built this resort as a place of joy," I continued. "That joy was stolen, corrupted by greed, but today we reclaim it." I unveiled the memorial plaque, listing every victim's name. Below it, a trust fund announcement, millions in restitution for the families, drawn from the hidden accounts I'd discovered. Mr. Alexander, Mrs. Thompson approached me afterward. "Your father's lawyers reached out. They're offering a deal, full confession in exchange for reduced sentences." "No deals," I said firmly. "They face everything they did, every life they took." Back in my office, David waited with news from the preliminary hearing. "Dad's breaking down. Keeps saying grandfather forced his hand, that the resort was failing before they started their scheme." More lies. I pulled out the original financial records. Wintercrest was thriving. Their investment program was pure greed. My phone buzzed, a message from Thomas. "Sir, the Christmas Eve tradition." Ah yes, the annual staff gathering. Some traditions deserve to continue. In the employee dining hall, I found the entire staff assembled. Many had worked here for decades, unknowingly witnessing the darkness that had plagued their workplace. "You are the heart of Wintercrest," I told them. "Through all the shadows you kept my grandfather's spirit alive. Your loyalty will never be forgotten." Margaret, the head housekeeper, stepped forward with tears in her eyes. "We always knew you were different, Mr. Jack. Even as a boy, you cared about the resort, about us. Just like your grandfather." I presented them with their Christmas bonuses, significantly larger than previous years, along with documentation of the new employee profit-sharing program. "Real change started with taking care of your people." Later that night, I walked the grounds alone. Snow crunched under my boots as I passed the ski slopes where so many accidents had occurred. The perfect crimes, they'd thought, until the overlooked son started paying attention. Kate found me by the old ski lift. The FBI finished processing Dad's private files. They found Mom's last letter. I closed my eyes, bracing myself. What did it say? She knew Jack. About the first victim. She was going to expose them, but they got to her first. I looked up at the stars. Another accident on the slopes. She tried to protect us. That's why she sent you to live with grandfather that summer. She knew he'd teach you what really mattered. The sound of carolers drifted across the snow, guests gathering for the traditional Christmas Eve celebration. Despite everything, people still came to Wintercrest, still believed in its magic. You know what's strange? David joined us, his breath frosting in the cold air. I keep thinking about all those Christmas mornings. The presents, the skiing lessons, the family photos. Were we ever real? "We are now," Kate said firmly. "Thanks to Jack." In the distance suite, 401's lights glowed softly. No more crime scene tape, no more dark secrets. Just truth, memory and hope for a better future. "Tomorrow," I said, "we start a new tradition. Real family, real joy, real legacy." The snow began falling again, covering yesterday's footprints with fresh powder. Somewhere in a prison cell, my father and uncle faced their crimes. But here at Wintercrest, redemption sparkled like frost in the moonlight. "Merry Christmas," I whispered to my grandfather's memory. We made it right, and in the quiet of the mountain night, surrounded by the beauty he'd first seen in this place, I felt his approval. The legacy was safe at last. Christmas morning dawned clear and bright, at Wintercrest Resort, the fresh snow glittering like diamonds under the rising sun. From my grandfather's office, my office now, I watched the first skiers taking to the slopes, their laughter carrying across the crisp mountain air. The morning paper sat on my desk. Our story now relegated to page 3. Wintercrest Resort begins new chapter. Christmas traditions continue despite family scandal. Beside it lay a letter from the prosecutors. Both my father and uncle had finally signed full confessions, facing life sentences, without possibility of parole. Mr. Alexander, Thomas knocked gently. The Christmas morning ceremony is ready to begin. In the grand lobby, hundreds of guests gathered around the massive Christmas tree. Kate stood with her children, their eyes bright with excitement. David, sober for the first time in years, helped Margaret distribute hot chocolate to everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, I began. Welcome to Wintercrest's first Christmas under restored management. 50 years ago, my grandfather started a tradition on this very spot. He believed that every guest here was family, that every moment could be magical. I unveiled a restored portrait of him, taken the year he opened the resort. Today we honor that vision, not just with words, but with actions. The children's ski program participants came forward, each receiving scholarships for next year. Then the victims' families' children, awarded lifetime passes to ensure their connection to the mountain wouldn't be tainted by tragedy. But there's one more announcement, I continued. Starting today, Wintercrest Resort is becoming a cooperative. Every employee will be a part owner, sharing in both the responsibilities and rewards of this place. The staff's surprised gasps turned to applause. Margaret wiped tears from her eyes as I handed her the first ownership certificate. Later, as families enjoyed their Christmas celebrations, I walked to the small chapel on the property. Inside, a new plaque honored all those who'd lost their lives here, including my mother and grandfather. They'd be proud, Detective Martinez said, joining me quietly. Especially your mother. We found her diary in your father's vault. She knew you'd be the one to make things right someday. Not just right, I corrected. Better outside. The sound of sleigh bells announced the beginning of the annual Christmas ride. Children's laughter echoed across the snow as Kate's kids piled into the first sleigh. Uncle Jack, they called, come with us. For a moment I hesitated. There was still so much work to do, so many wounds to heal. Go, David nudged me. That's what this place is really about, remember? Not the business, not the legacy, the joy. As the sleigh glided through the snowy trails, I thought about cycles broken and renewed. My father had turned my grandfather's dream into a nightmare, but now we'd awaken to a new day. The resort would never forget its dark chapter, but neither would it be defined by it. Like the fresh snow covering yesterday's tracks, we built something clean and pure atop the shadows. That evening, watching the Christmas lights twinkle across the resort, I opened my grandfather's old journal. His final entry read, "A legacy isn't what you leave behind, it's what you pass forward." "Merry Christmas, grandfather," I whispered. "We're passing it forward now." And in the gathering dusk, as families celebrated and new memories were made, Wintercrest Resort glowed with the warmth of redemption, renewal, and real joy at last.